Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 10 transfer plans. We've just finished with Game Week 9. It was a pretty eventful game week, but for the consequences of my team, not too many. I think it was quite important in terms of actually creating a structure shift in my team to do this now, because I'm almost in a tight spot where the team is close to being sort of priced out of the moves that I wanted to make, right? So if I think back about the weekend that we've had so far, I moved out of Reinders into Saka. I moved into Krupi Jr. from Gyökeres. I also have Mateta, for example, the bench. So the team looks still, relatively speaking, quite good. I also have Anderson, who I'm waiting on the wings for, and we'll talk about him in a moment. But I think the last move that I made was Paqueta to Enzo, right? And I think just sort of thinking forwards, players like Enzo, players like Saka, even and even let's say maybe the price falls that will happen towards a Reinders and a Gyökeres will definitely come in towards the future where I don't have this sort of cushion with 0.2 in the bank that I have. And so I'm quite happy to have made those moves. Was it net a huge improvement in the team? No, it was plus 2 points, right? Saka outscoring Gyökeres, Krupi doing a bit better. Hard to say what the comparison for Krupi is. Technically, of course, he outscored Gyökeres, but I very well could have made some defender moves, maybe a Rodon, but I don't think I would have done that because the reason why I didn't make a defender move this week is just simply I think that with Anderson being an injury, I didn't see the need to make a defensive transfer unless I was going to go Anderson out of my team. And even still, I couldn't have afforded a move like Paqueta to Enzo. So the Saka to Krupi sort of type structure was quite helpful. And I'm quite happy to sort of be on this structure for now. I think when I look at the team going forwards, I'm quite happy if Anderson just comes back in game week 11. I still think maybe game week 10 sounds like it could be too soon just based on some of the quotes that we've gotten so far from Marco Silva. I thought Dewsbury Hall had a really poor performance, but I think he still shows the value that I can see in terms of being able to get FPL points for a player that sort of price point. Just thinking about sort of Longstaff, set pieces, etc. That's kind of the value Dewsbury Hall does give towards the game, and he really could have got an assist within the match. Obviously, that was called for an offside. And Jai is very clearly the best player to get from Everton and is the best player in Everton, but it's not something I can really reach within my team. With Bruno, I'm sure a lot of people will be reflecting on someone like Bruno this weekend and thinking that he has to go. I think actually, if you watched the game and sort of were a bit fair, I think Mbemo was incredible, which is also why I recommended Mbemo a lot for my sort of TikTok videos and even short videos for this week in terms of like what transfers that I would prioritize, right? I kind of feel like both these players are very good in FPL, and if you're not spending that much money in let's say a Saka or Gyökeres, and maybe you have triple Arsenal defense, like you can even own both. But yeah, within the context of Bruno, I think he had actually great chances to score himself. So I can't really complain too much that he got nothing from that game. He still got DEFCON, right? So and that's better than a lot of players this week where there were so many blanks categorically across the board. It was really Van de Ven who sort of ruined the game week for me and sent me from a green arrow towards a red arrow with the points that I've had. And I think ultimately I ended up with 47 points, right? So just the Gabriel bonus points is still yet to come in. Unfortunately, he didn't get 10 DEFCON, but was extremely close. He got 9 DEFCON in this match, and I was just thankful, of course, that he played as well. Virgil, extremely disappointing. Probably one of the players that I'm looking at and thinking, is he really providing the value? But at the same time, he's doing really, really good within DEFCON. And I think when you kind of look across the league, sure, I can easily put my hands up and say both Sunderland and Leeds look really impressive. I think we've mentioned that. I mean, I'm aware of that myself. It's just when Liverpool, I guess, have that really good run of games, and I probably am going to give Virgil those run of games, things like West Ham away, not necessarily Sunderland at home, I guess, but I mean, I think even Leeds away, you can say probably the lack of attack there is something that maybe I can enjoy Virgil from it. And generally speaking, it really extends quite a long time. So the hope really is that Virgil can sort of improve and Liverpool can sort of find a game where they can actually get a clean sheet, or even for Virgil to get set pieces, because we're seeing across the league set pieces are so effective, right? Not only just from things like a corner, but also actually just the long throws and how that's changed the game a lot in terms of even some of the goals that we've seen this weekend. So really hoping that Virgil provides some value soon. I think just on a fixture sort of level, I almost have to hold him with Lacroix. I have mentioned previously that I do find him a little bit annoying, but at the same time, I can't really complain too much about owning someone like Lacroix when you see the Arsenal game and he plays against a center forward like Gyökeres and he hits 21 DEFCON within a match. So that's sometimes a little bit of perspective in terms of looking at and comparing him towards someone like a Chris Richards, and maybe me also just needing to calm down a little bit. I mean, in the future though, of course, I think there's angles to say that there's ways I can save money within the team and maybe improve that Dewsbury Hall spot. At the same time, Krupi Jr. is providing a lot of value for this Bournemouth team. Not necessarily the minutes that I'd like to see. I think with Evan Nilsson being out, I'd probably prefer if he could play more than 70 minutes a game, but that's kind of what he's getting from Marco Silva, or from Iraola. And that's good enough for me for a match like this. And so hopefully the kind of question is, in a few weeks' time when he actually has a game like West Ham, can Krupi Jr. play for me? That's sort of what I'm looking forwards to. At the same time, Mark Yu got a price drop during the middle of the week, so I kind of felt quite good about making the Krupi Jr. transfer because he's gotten a price rise, could potentially get another one, and at the same time, I've dodged a price drop there for Mark Yu. So Holland blanking, I think, look, it was going to be inevitable in terms of this week, and the irony, I suppose, is that I didn't really have anyone in this team who was an obvious vice captaincy option that massively outscored him, so I can't feel too hard about it. I don't think I was really considering actually vicing Saka or Bruno, especially with the Saka uncertainty close towards the deadline about him sort of not being in training. As it turns out, it seems like he was actually just sick, so I don't really have any fears about owning Saka in the future, and hopefully, he can get rested, not play potentially, hopefully, the midweek game, and actually just be fit for the weekend instead. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. And as I said, Dewsbury Hall is probably the worst player on my team in terms of attack right now, but do I really care too much when I think he's only going to play for me for Sunderland away? I don't think so. So when I kind of look at how I would select my team for next week, I think this is a relatively solid team structure. So if I'm going to play Virgil versus Villa, not ideal, but it is what it is because I would be more tempted to actually bench players like Ruby Jr., Senesi, and Dewsbury Hall. If Anderson can play, then of course I don't have to play someone like Dewsbury Hall, but I think he would actually be at the top of my bench for now. And maybe Senesi could be maybe ahead of Krupi Jr., but it's hard to say because I think the pro of having someone like Krupi Jr. right now is he's starting, and Evan Nilsson might just miss the next game. So this is going to be an attacker at least versus Man City, and I'm comfortable playing Semenyo. So the big thing compared to a lot of other people is the lack of Daniel Munoz. This could be an opportunity for some people to just say, why don't you just go from Virgil to Munoz? And whilst the Crystal Palace fixture is really good, or the fixture run is really good, I do still think that Virgil has some value, and I would like to sort of start rolling some free transfers for now. At the same time, I think we can also just say that Brentford actually looked like a pretty competent team. So is it that much of sort of huge clean sheet odds game for a team like Crystal Palace? I would probably say no, but once again, they looked very solid versus Arsenal in defense. So there's not much you can really criticize that team for. I can't really go out of Enzo now. I'm quite happy to have actually owned him because when I compare it to, let's say, João Pedro, when considering Chelsea's fixture run, I mean, Enzo was actually cracking shots still. He didn't have the best games, but the main thing is you're still seeing that he's actually performing actions on the pitch that would hopefully lead towards goals and assists. So that sort of set piece value is still there with Enzo as well. And hopefully, of course, we still think he's on penalties. So that's kind of how I'm viewing things at this moment in time. The team looks pretty solid. I think I've got solid options across the board. I'm a little bit thin in terms of bench compared to some other people, but at the same time, I think there are other teams that maybe have things like King, Juve, maybe even another defender who's a little bit less playable, or maybe a midfielder as well. And I think ultimately the team looks really solid. So pretty happy about that. Directionally speaking, we'll talk about the transfer plans in a moment, but I think I'm still angling a role here, just looking at the team and how things have gone. Now, to take a step back and almost to review Game Week 9, I think Game Week 9 actually went really, really well against our expectations outside of probably that Chelsea and Sunderland match. Liverpool have been really poor as of late, so I don't think that this is a gigantic surprise, this sort of Brentford win, to be quite honest, when you kind of look at things like how they even played at Anfield versus United and the amount of chances that they actually gave in the first half there, and just generally how they've performed within the league last few games. Villa versus City is an interesting one where I think that's always a classic case of when Pep sort of plays, let's say, Reinders at DM. I'm not exactly sure what the plan is there. I think City's weakness has always been the midfield over the last 2 seasons, and I don't think Reinders necessarily improves it in terms of how good they are defensively in transition. Now, of course, he sort of improves the team offensively, I would say, and still adds a little bit of legs towards the team, but not surprised that that performance went Aston Villa's way. And Haaland still had chances, right? So I think it goes back to this sort of overarching point of, is City that interesting of a team to be invested into outside of Haaland? Probably not. So I think we just need to sort of respect that City do have some tough fixtures coming up, and that it makes sense to sort of move transfers out of City players. With Bournemouth, we know that the fixture run gets good again in 2 weeks' time, so of course we don't need to say too much about that. I think people are also potentially overrating a little bit how good Forest could be under Sean, so there's not much to be said there. And Wolves and Burnley, I think that's just, yes, of course, Wolves have gotten some terrible performances recently, and they've just let in a lot of goals. Are they as bad as West Ham? I don't think so. I think almost those two teams are, really up there in terms of creating a very serious sort of race to getting relegated first. whilst all the other teams, even some of the promoted teams, have gotten so many points across the board. And Sunderland, as I said, was the big sort of talking point over the weekend, and it started so early too. Impressive performance for Chelsea. I think a lot of people saw the matches and sort of saw the highlights as well and probably criticized the Chelsea defense and even towards an extent the midfield. But I mean, that's just how impressive Sunderland have been. It almost seems like, there's a lot of phases in the game that you want to get good at as a team. And Sunderland have sort of mastered a lot of them that some teams just don't focus on so much within the Premier League in terms of set pieces and things like that. And being able to sort of optimize for chances across the board. You see this weekend, and yeah, I mean, not surprised that there were so many set piece goals because a lot of the Premier League teams are putting a huge focus around that. And Brentford, of course, poster boy for that with the sort of set piece coach that they actually have as a manager. So yeah, over the course of this weekend, I don't think we learned too much in terms of how I feel about teams, how I would evaluate them going forwards. I think last week I already sort of jumped the gun in terms of saying I was pretty confident that this Man United team would be quite good. They still collapsed for the most part in the second half, but I think that's natural when you sort of lead the game 3-0. With Everton versus Spurs, I think that's a very sort of one-off result. Like, I'm sure I'm super happy for anyone who actually owns Van de Ven. I think that's an amazing haul. 23 points from a defender. That's exactly why you want to play FPL. Exactly what I would want to own at one point in time. For someone who's not too highly owned, because a lot of people have, and I think justifiably too, have been moving off the Spurs or even benching some of the Spurs defenders this week. But yeah, for Everton to come out of that game with 0 goals is rather unfortunate, but that happens from time to time. And I think it just shows you that if we can sort of pigeonhole the Spurs team as a certain type of team, it's very much a team that sort of focuses around set pieces, reduces the quality of chances of their opponents, and tries to stifle them in that sort of way. And they've been very, very dull from the attacking point of view. So I can understand why people want to continue to move out of players like Kudus, but there's inherently some value within their defenders. Now, you shouldn't be expecting things like a Van de Ven brace often, but it just shows you the power of set pieces across the board, right? So that's pretty much it for this week. And let's quickly jump into my own transfer plans. Right, so we're back here with my team in terms of Gameweek 10 and looking how that's going to feel out. Now, we've already discussed that within just now and that section, but I think the key thing, sort of taking a step back, of course, even from a sort of, looking at the Fantasy Football Hub AI solver approach, is just that it seems to make sense for me to play Dewsbury Hall, right? He doesn't seem like he's provided a lot of value as late, but still as a sort of player who doesn't have an awful game, depending on, let's say, Krupi Jr.'s minutes, I think it does make sense to play him. So just a good sense check sometimes when you actually have a model in place. As I said, you can have a look at the My Team pick and rating tool, which is what I'm exactly using to sort of plan my transfers every single week here in the link in description below. Key thing is that the team's strong, right? I think and it's nice to just have a team that week on week, generally speaking, has good, let's say, matches. Of course, if Anderson comes back, that's ideal for me. So that probably means that I'm going to roll here in Gameweek 10. I think the only thing that would really force a transfer for myself if I really felt that much FOMO in terms of Sar and some of the other picks within the game. Like, for me, it doesn't make sense to go a bit of a sideways move right now to go from Enzo to Sar. At the same time, I don't think I'm going to gamble on Semenyo doing extremely bad for the next 2 weeks. Same with Bruno. These are all players that I really like holding. I know I've spent a little bit more money on some of these players in terms of Bruno and Asaka, but I'm happy with it as it stands. For Game Week 11, this is another week where I think the team looks reasonably strong. This is now 2 weeks in a row where I'd be playing Dewsbury Hall, but I think once again, the only chance or situation that means that Dewsbury Hall plays is if, let's say, Anderson isn't available. I think in both these instances, in both these weeks, I would actually want to play Anderson over Dewsbury Hall, or even Senesi, as you can see here, over Dewsbury Hall, even just marginally. What I can do, of course, in terms of thinking about transfers in the future is that, of course, we still have so many of the good 4.0 type defenders. And the only problem is that if I go out to someone like Anderson, I don't think I can really upgrade Dewsbury Hall to anyone that I really like. Like, even if I think back about my own cheat sheet, there's not really anyone at that sort of 5.0 to 5.5 price range where I really think, okay, I need to be making a move from Dewsbury Hall out into these types of players. And I think so a lot of the make weights oftentimes when I look at my own team would be probably actually reshifting how I own triple Arsenal, or maybe, let's say, thinking about Semenyo out, which, as I said, I don't think it necessarily needs to be done. The whole reason why I went into this sort of Saka structure is because I quite like owning the picks that I have and just going all out and basically having, I would say, one weaker type player to sort of accommodate the big firing guns that I have within my team that are now situated within the midfield alongside the sort of front two now of Haaland, Mateta, and just sort of playing that 3-5-2 perpetually, or a 4-4-2, right, if Anderson's available. And this is, I think, quite good because Game Week 11 should undoubtedly be a pretty tough week for a lot of managers. Like, anyone who owns maybe like double digit triple City, anyone who owns like maybe too much of Liverpool, for example, like myself with Virgil. Arguably, some people would even say that one Liverpool defender is too many. But yeah, I think this still leaves me with a reasonably good team for Game Week 11. I think it's actually more so Game Week 12 where there's going to be transfers that can potentially be made. Now, ironically, this is a really good week for someone like Virgil. So I don't even need Anderson available here at Sunderland at home for me to have a good team in Game Week 12. So, but what I'm saying about Game Week 12 is I think this is a pretty big decision making point for a lot of managers within the game because actually what's going to happen is you're coming out of the international break here from Game Week 11 towards Game Week 12. So potentially there's going to be injuries, which is why I really want to save transfers up until then. But secondly, I think the key point to make here is that this is another time to revisit how you triple up on Arsenal because I believe Noni Madueke and Kai Havertz should be coming back into the game. So if you presently own Gyökeres or you like myself own Saka and you want to see what happens with the minutes going forwards with these players, this is probably one of the first game weeks where you're starting to make that decision internally of how you want to move around and shift around triple Arsenal and how you own those teams. And then, of course, as I said, you can react towards any sort of international break type injuries at this moment in time. Game week 13, though, I think is where I have a pretty obvious move to make. I previously, within sort of my videos, I've mostly sort of been mentioning how I think it'd be quite interesting to actually go for a free hit here. But I was also thinking about that on the assumption that I would really want to own triple Chelsea and also maybe even triple Brentford, right? Because this is such a good fixture. This is Brentford versus Burnley at home. So Game Week 13 is still an interesting window where I think either I play naturally or I go for a free hit here. And I think that's where my transfer plans start to diverge. For now, I think I'm quite happy with the players that I have in my team. As I said, I am missing a couple players who clearly have done really well as of late. But I don't think I necessarily need to be throwing transfers at players like 4.0 defenders if I don't need to or don't want to. And at the same time, for someone like Munoz, who of course is incredible, but I just don't think I have a reasonable and an easy, quick way to getting there. So when I kind of look at the team as it stands, I think if I free hit, I free hit. If I go and I don't free hit, I think this is a pretty good window to maybe jump off of Enzo. Potentially Palmer could be back in the game, and this is not a particularly good week for Arsenal anyways, or Chelsea. I feel okay playing Arsenal double defense versus Chelsea away. Chelsea haven't been that threatening from the offensive point of view, but of course we know that a lot of their guns will be back by then, right? We've already heard news about how Delap is in training. We know, as I said, Palmer might be back. I don't think he'll necessarily be here on this game week, but it's possible, right? Because this is 1 week after the international break, he could be fit and ready to play. But I think Enzo out towards someone like Minte makes sense. Now, the AI transfer suggestion is 3 other top players that I absolutely love. These are all players that are on my cheat sheet outside of Ahmad, who will be back on the cheat sheet. But I think you're seeing even Ahmad, he's still an early substitution in a lot of games, like, for example, the Liverpool game and the Brighton game too. So Sarr and Njai are interesting, but these are both players going towards AFCON. So I think that the plan for me is actually to go towards someone like Minte, who still is quite very much loved by the kind of AI team rating tool. It's just that this specific match here in Game Week 13, Nottingham Forest away is seen as a pretty poor game for pretty good reasons, right? I think it might be too aggressive of a move, but I think it would be quite natural if I didn't want to play Enzo versus Arsenal to actually just make Enzo to Minte here. At the same time, I think that going back to almost what the transfer suggestions are, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to me to actually go towards Sarr potentially, if I just want to go out of Enzo. And once again, we know that we got the 5 free AFCON transfers in Game Week 16, so why do I need to even care particularly about owning, let's say, a player that goes towards AFCON? If I think Sarr is the best player, I'll pick Sarr as the best player here. The only thing that I dislike about NJ around this run is that I, as someone who doesn't own Sarr presently, will not enjoy things like Fulham at home, will not enjoy Sunderland away. And then I think that Game Week 12, you can say first United is a pretty tough match. Game Week 13 is an okay match, but it's still Newcastle, really good defense. And actually, the fixtures after that are pretty poor outside of Nottingham Forest at home. So that's kind of why I generally prefer Sarr, because when I look at the Sarr fixtures, actually, to me, they're a lot better, right? I would be owning for United at home, Burnley away, City away, not the City at home, sorry, not one of the best games. Fulham away, probably actually quite good because I don't think the Fulham defense have been that impressive this season. So I think still slightly better than the NJ run. Whereas Minte himself actually has some pretty good games coming out of Nottingham Forest away, but it's still some pretty poor games like Liverpool away too. So they're all quite closely mixed, and for a good reason. They're all top players within my cheat sheet. I think it's just a case of hoping to get lucky with the player that I want to move into at this point in time in Game Week 13. Equally, if let's say Palmer's not fit and available, I mean, I don't really mind, I guess, keeping Enzo for a while longer. I think he's very interesting, especially with penalties. So it's not like this is a move that has to be made. This is more of a luxury move. But yeah, that's kind of my plan. Now, what I have thought about more recently is if I don't, let's say, make the Enzo move and still continue to play going forwards without using a free hit is actually think about Game Week 15 as a free hit. I mean, I've watched countless Aston Villa and Arsenal games. I feel like Arsenal always lose a clean sheet versus them. A little bit of narrative bias there. But this is another good, interesting game week to maybe consider going for a little bit of a different sort of team. Once again, this is not a good week for Bournemouth. So the triple Bournemouth here, I don't think is particularly great versus Chelsea at home, but it's still a home match, which I think is a positive. This is a great game for Holland, so there's not much to be said here. But I think this is interesting because you can consider actually going more deeply into City. And I think because I've mentioned I'd like to roll so much, one thing that I've sort of neglected as well over this run of games is that actually from Game Week 13 onwards, buying back into more Man City players could be interesting, right? Like if Guardiola's interesting, if Foden's interesting to us, then we can probably consider actually using transfers that have been saved up until Game Week 13 to move into City players here, instead of actually what I suggested, which was just a simple Enzo to Minte move. So that's something to think about within my own team. But Game Week 15 as a free hit, I think, is quite interesting, just to sort of shift off of triple Arsenal defense potentially, or whatever variation of Arsenal that I have that's tripled up for this game week, and maybe to consider a little bit of a stronger team. This is also a pretty poor game from the Chelsea perspective, right? So like Enzo isn't exactly someone that I would love to own here, but maybe I actually feel a little bit more comfortable owning Enzo if I free hit one of these bad weeks for Chelsea. So something that I've thought about is that 13 and 15 now look more interesting. I have to be completely honest in saying that the free hit sort of narrative for me is already changed, right? I already mentioned how I'm not interested in actually looking for a Salah free hit. If anything, I'm actually just looking for an opportunity to just shift off of triple Arsenal and to have a team that's a little bit less template, I suppose, compared to the rest of the field that should have a lot of expected points gain, hopefully, within a certain game week. So something to mention. But that's kind of my transfer plans. Right now, I am planning on rolling. I think Game Week 12 and 13 are pretty big decision windows for us as managers. And so I'm planning to roll my free transfers up until then. But inevitably, I'm sure injuries can come up. As I said, there are midweek games for this week here between Game Weeks 9 and 10. So maybe that means I'll be having to use my transfers again. But also, on the flip side, I think you should be encouraged to use transfers from this run here up until Game Week 16, because you do know that you're going to get this sort of update of 5 free transfers on 16. So I feel like if you're not being aggressive enough and you're not chasing the sort of team structure that you want now, I mean, what is the opportunity cost is something that you probably want to weigh yourself. I am quite an aggressive manager. I like using my transfers. I don't really care too much for having a huge bank of free transfers, because I tend to think if I set my team up well and in a good way and I'm aggressive, I think generally speaking, I don't have a lot of issues to sort of alleviate within my team, but that's sort of my biased point of view. But it at the same time, I can completely understand a manager who actually thinks, okay, there's so many good midfielders right now. It's not like everyone is identifiably super obvious to own. You can't own, let's say, Semenyo, Saka, Sar, Njai, Enzo, Minte, Bruno, and Bermo all together, even Gakpo towards an extent, right? So you just have to pick and choose sometimes with FPL, and I can understand why a manager wants to be slightly more passive, to sort of wait for angles to open themselves up naturally, because you just have injuries that will probably just promote good play by just holding up free transfers. So up to you guys as managers. I think, as I said, I've already made the moves that I felt like were aggressive last week, and that's going to promote me now being more passive over the next few. But let me know what your plans are in terms of your team structure. Are you planning to move into, for example, a 3-5-2 type structure? Are you planning to move into maybe more bigger at the back? Or maybe bigger at the back, but actually just still owning 4.0 defenders there. So yeah, let me know what your thoughts are. I hope you guys had a wonderful game week, and shout out to anyone who did the non-Holland captaincy this week, or even, for example, just simply has Van de Ven, which is maybe, half or more of my game week score. So take care and goodbye. I'll see you guys soon.